let's talk about The God of Endings by Jacqueline Holland. So this was my first read of the year. And what a note to start on. This is basically a book that follows a young woman who goes by Anya, Colette, depending on what part of the story we're in. And she is a vampire. And basically we get snapshots of how she gets turned all the way up to modern day, which is set in the 1980s. And how she kind of grapples with being a vampire and ultimately never leaving humanity fully. She's always dealing with a human being. And this book to me is so special because it handles vampirism in a way that I feel like is a really hard line to toe, where she herself regrets, being a vampire. She was a child when she was turned by her step-grandfather, and how, she is very envious of humanity and very sorrowful that she's lost her humanity. But without it being whiny, I hate a vampire that hates being a vampire, in the sense of Louis from Interview with the Vampire or Edward Cullen from Twilight. And Colette, I think, just mourns the ability to have the human experience as she watches others have it, and knowing that she's always going to be a figure within humanity and within the people she goes close to's lives as a very distant figure that's eventually going to have to run away, because again, she's a vampire. She's not going to age. And what I do like, too, is we do see her, even though I say she gets turned as a child, we don't have, an Interview with the Vampire situation like Claudia, where she's, 5 forever. She does age, and it just seems like, if anything, the way it's handled is almost like an evolutionary necessity of being a vampire, where, it acknowledges it's not functional to be a child forever. And she grows up to basically, I'd say, be a woman that's probably presenting no more than, 25 years old, probably leaning more towards 22, but she's able to disguise it over the years as being older. When we get the modern day setting of 1980s, she's running basically a fancy, precocious art school for preschoolers, and she just kind of presents herself in a way that I think probably the parents think she's in her 30s, and she's just an eccentric little artist lady because she has no husband, this, that, and the other. But I just love that we see her grappling with humanity throughout this whole book and kind of coming to terms with what being a vampire means. And she gets this experience of being on a boat as a young vampire and able to fight back and watching humans be vile, trapped on a boat. Because again, this is, it starts out in the 1700s, getting over to somewhere in Eastern Europe that's quite wooded. And then she's quite sheltered for many, many years and basically lives with a woman who's some kind of magical figure. It's never quite clarified, but very much Witch of the Woods, if you will, vibe. And with 2 young men, one being a vampire and the other being a human twin brother that still has magical abilities. She's quite sheltered for many, many years as she grows up in that, until that's destroyed. And the whole focus of The God of Endings is one of the main characters in the portion where they're just kind of living with the Witch in the Woods talks about the God of Endings, which is Cherna's Bog, which I am probably pronouncing horribly, and I am so sorry. And that the God of Endings will always come for you, and that's kind of her driving fear, is because she knows she's immortal, and when she knows when the God of Endings comes for her, some of the people that are people and not vampires are gonna get hurt, and we see her running from that end. But in reality, if you're running from your ending, you're ultimately ending what you're doing anyway and starting over. It's not necessarily a horrible thing. It's not necessarily terrible. It's okay for things to end. And that's what we see. We see things ending. We see rebirth. We see death. We see life coming from death. It's a very cyclical, beautiful thing. But the tone of this book is just absolutely phenomenal. It is somehow so soft and so quiet and so peaceful, yet it details so much sorrow and so much pain and so much action. We see her dealing with living in France during World War II and dealing with Nazis hurting the people she cares about. We see very heavy stuff that's handled in such a soft way, where it doesn't soften how important it is or soften the blow of how bad this is, but it just feels like the entire time reading it in the best way possible, you have noise canceling earbuds. There's that, weird muffled, you can't hear what's going on around you. This book's absolutely, it's stunning. It's incredible. We see her just experience life. I don't know. I could ramble about how soft and how beautiful and how kind this is, but this book is truly incredible. I highly recommend it. On some level, I think you might need to be in a certain headspace to receive it appropriately. I definitely, if you're in not so great of a mental space, maybe not, because it does discuss, I feel like, so many heavy topics. But I think this is a great read for anybody that's looking for something different from the vampire genre, that's a little less gory, a little less violent, and a little less romantic. It's very pragmatic and very sad, but without being whiny like Edward Cullen, even though I do love Twilight. But God of Endings, beautiful, 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 fabulous debut novel. This just came out like in 2024, 2023. I highly recommend it. Please pick it up. Like, you will not regret it whatsoever.